Extra, extra, read all about it. Extra, extra. Fellow Toastmasters and welcome guests. If I was a newspaper reporter and I was reporting about your life, what would the headlines read? Would it be that you're rich and famous? Or maybe there'd be some skeletons in your closet. But I believe a more important question to ask is, what will the headlines of the rest of your life look like? Do you have goals and aspirations that bubble up in your mind? Maybe you'd like to be a writer or learn how to speak better. But if you haven't sat down and begun to type out the outline for that book or visit a Toastmaster meeting, there's a very good chance that unless you put an action to your desire, that it will never come to pass. And do you live your life on purpose? Or do you just do what's always been done because that's what you do? A little girl was watching her mother as her mother prepared the dinner. The mother took out a roast from the refrigerator and took out the pan. She then chopped off both ends of the roast and put it in the roasting pan and popped it in the oven. The little girl watched intently and said, "Mommy, why did you cut off both ends of the roast before you put it in the pan?" The mother thought for a moment and said, "I'm not real sure, except for that's the way Grandma always did it." The little girl thought for a moment and said, "But Mommy, why does Grammy do it that way?" The mother said, "I don't really know. Why don't we call her up and ask?" So when they talked to Grammy chuckled and said, "Well, that's very simple. You see, my roasting pan was so small. The only way I could fit the roast in the pan was to chop off both ends." Now you can see that both of these women did the same identical action, but one was doing something logical and practical, and the other was simply doing what was always done without consideration or thinking about it. Are there ways in your life that you do that? I like to think about it as cleaning out your closet. We all know if you physically clean out your closet, you go through everything in the closet. You take it out, you examine it, you question, is this something that serves me today? And if it doesn't, you let it go. A number of months ago, I was cleaning out the house of a loved one, and I came across these tiny little shoes. They're called lotus blossom shoes. As I held them in my hand to admire them, one tumbled to the ground. As I bent down to pick it up, I happened to turn it over and see the sole of the shoe. I gasped because when I looked at it, I realized these weren't just a souvenir, but that these were real shoes worn by another human being, and not a little girl, but a grown adult woman. I'd read many articles and stories over the years of the technique or tradition of binding the feet of little girls. Now, we've all worn shoes that were too tight for a couple of hours and know how painful that could be. Imagine having your foot bound for the rest of your life. And they often even broke the foot to create an arch so that it would fit in the shoe. Now, most of us would judge those traditions and wonder why they would subject their daughter to such pain. But I think a better question to ask is, in what ways do you live a confined and restricted life that maybe you don't know that you're doing because of tradition? Now, this tradition went on for many, many years until one day, one person stood up and said, "No, we can't do this any longer." And despite the fact that that was one voice and it took many years before it happened, eventually that tradition was eradicated. As a little girl, I was very shy and quiet. I used to hide behind my mother's apron strings, but that really didn't do me much good because you see, my mother was very shy and quiet as well. And basically, I was taught girls should not have an opinion. And if for any reason they did have an opinion, they should never express that opinion. Now, I know there's some fellas out there that think that's a great rule. And that served me well for a long time because I was so shy and quiet. But there came a point in time in my life when something within me began to stir, and I knew I couldn't live in the confines of my traditions. And I had to begin to push those walls out in order for me to survive and grow into who I needed to be in this world. It's not easy to go against the grain of tradition. But just like that woman who spoke up, I had to live who I need to be. So, fellow Toastmasters and welcome guests, it's really not that important what the headlines of your life would read to us, but it's very important how it would read to you. And yes, maybe you want to be rich and famous, but maybe what's important to you is to plant a beautiful garden or spend time with your children and grandchildren, whatever makes your heart sing, so that when your final moments come, you will know that you lived your life your way and that you lived from the passion of your heart and the song of your soul. Madam Contest Chair.